What do you think the advantages are of tattooing over other forms of identification?
I think all identification has a place, and what it's important to remember is that with tattooing you have permanent visible identification. You don't require anything else to be able to see the identification other than eyesight. It is identification that cannot be removed. It can't be altered. It's going to be there for the whole of the dog's life, and certainly as a deterrent to dog thieves, it can be called into question at any point. Anyone who spots it can call in bring the tattoo into question. I think it's advantageous in that when puppies like these little border terriers have been tattooed at the request of the breeder, they're jointly registered both to the breeder and the owner. So in the event that one of these little puppies goes through the scheme, perhaps an owner either can't or won't be contacted, then we can contact the breeder, and if they so wish, they're able to take responsibility for their puppy, and obviously that's really important. I think the other advantages are that it is cost effective, it's not expensive to have litters of puppies tattooed, and I think it's really good that these puppies go off to their new homes already identifiable. I would say the main advantage to tattooing though is its theft deterrent value, and certainly it does put people off. If you're trying to steal dogs to sell to order, to try and pass on a puppy with a tattoo that doesn't have the correct paperwork would be like trying to sell a car without a logbook.
Another point that we've sort of discussed previously is obviously for breeders, looking to avoid inherited diseases.
Yes, I mean, certainly if you've got a breed that requires hereditary genetic testing such as hip scoring or elbow testing, it means that the tester knows absolutely that the dog that is coming in to be tested is the dog the breeder says it is. The tattoo numbers are on the KC registrations. That can be checked when the dog is taken in, and we would then know for sure that the same dog wasn't repeatedly being taken in to have hip scoring done perhaps in place of other dogs. And because the dogs are always permanently identified, it gives us a good record going back many years of these genetic tests having been done within certain lines.
Are you surprised at people's reaction to how many people they believe have their dogs tattooed? I mean, is that yes, a shock to you?
It's quite odd, because I think microchipping is very highly promoted by the veterinary profession, and certainly is perhaps the most common choice for people when they take their first puppy in to be vaccinated. If the vets only promote microchipping, then they tend to go with that. And as a result, you will find that people are unaware of how many dogs are actually being tattooed. And certainly people will say, perhaps those who are first-time owners to dogs will say, well, I didn't know there was a choice to have it tattooed because I don't know any dogs that are tattooed. The plain fact is they've probably never looked. Why would they? There may be lots of dogs near them that are tattooed, but they just wouldn't know.
I know you look after the Kent and East Sussex areas.
I do, yes.
How many dogs have you tattooed this year?
I counted up before I came here today, and so far I've tattooed 562 dogs. There may, of course, be rather more than that in those areas, because they may have been, they may have been tattooed by other tattooists and then come into the area, or occasionally tattooists do cross over boundaries, but me personally in those areas 562 dogs and puppies. So that's adult dogs and litters of puppies.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the puppies being tattooed, but is it the same for adult dogs? Is it as quick?
The process is identical. The only difference is the way the dog is handled. Right. And again, we firmly discourage owners from holding their own dogs. Now, that's not to say that some owners aren't very capable, but I have to be very, very confident in the person that's holding the dog. I have 2 assistants that I use, but Helen's my main assistant, and when she's holding the dog for me, I'm absolutely confident it's going to be held correctly. But apart from different methods of holding, and some are on the lap, if your mum was being done, she'd be on the lap, but she's already done. Some of the much larger breeds we have simply sitting and sort of place them in a corner, and Helen has very nice techniques to being able to hold them still. But again, they only have to be held still for those couple of seconds. I think I've said this several times, I think it's slightly unfortunate that it is called tattooing. It is tattooing, that's exactly what the process is, but people have quite strange ideas about tattooing with the amount of humans that are tattooed now. Most suffer some pain and some discomfort, or in fact quite a lot of pain and discomfort, and it takes a very long time to perform a tattoo. So unfortunately, I think people that don't get given the correct information do tend to believe it's going to be exactly the same, and they have an idea that we're going to sort of spend hours while this dog goes through the most incredible upset and pain. And of course the reality is very, very different. And I have certainly never had anybody who's watched tattooing for the first time go away saying, oh, that was awful. You know, far from it. What they always say is, I thought it would be awful. This was so not what I was expecting.
Right. Just for the people who are watching now, obviously, if they come across a lost or stray dog, perhaps when they're out walking around, or maybe one will turn up at their front door, what would you recommend that they do? I mean, obviously, first and foremost, if it wasn't wearing any form of identification.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, if you find a lost dog, you have an obligation in law to report it to the local authority dog warden or animal welfare officer. That's the first thing you do. Dogs that are microchipped for identification will need to be taken either to an open veterinary practice or to the dog warden to be scanned for a microchip. You should check every dog, if you're willing and able to do that, for an ear tattoo as well. The tattoo is nearly always on the inside of the right ear. There is the very odd occasion when it is done in the left ear, but that is extremely rare. So as a priority, it's the right ear that you check. Don't worry if you can't read the whole of the tattoo. That doesn't matter. It may be that the dog is fidgeting. It might be that some hair has encroached over part of the number over years. We can trace the owner or the breeder by only having sort of 2, 3 or 4 of the numbers. So we don't need to be able to read the whole thing. If you are able to just have a look in the ear, telephone the tattoo register. We can be found easily. It's the National Dog Tattoo Register. There is only one database for ear tattoos for pet dogs in this country. If you contact the register, tell them you found a dog, tell them the amount of the number that you can read, we will then bring up the details and contact the owner. In the very unlikely event that it isn't that easy, perhaps the dog is aggressive, we wouldn't want you to be looking in its ear quite clearly. Yeah. But if you think there is a tattoo there, and you may be led to it by the fact that we supply tags for the dog's collars that say the dog is tattooed, or you may simply be able to see it. In some breeds, for example in white bull terriers, the tattoo is going to wave at you across the road. So if you just know the dog is tattooed but you're not confident to look at the dog's ear, then we will give you directions as to what to do next.
So then, April, on a final note, what's the current position for animals travelling across on the pet passport scheme in regards to identification?
Currently, if you want to take advantage of the pet passport scheme, dogs must be microchipped for identification, and that's so that the identification can be checked on entrance and exits. We are slightly concerned in that there have been a substantial number of dogs that their microchip has actually failed or not been readable when the dogs have been coming back into this country. Now that poses quite a severe problem, because the choices for an owner is either that the dog returns to its point of origin or the country that it's come from. It goes into quarantine, 6 months quarantine. In some cases, owners have to opt to have the dog euthanized because they either don't want it to go back to the country of origin, or they simply can't afford the quarantine fees. There have also been cases of dogs having to be operated on to find the microchip, so that the microchip can be sent back to the distributors to actually have the identification checked that way. Now, this is really unacceptable. And what is worrying is that despite the fact that some of those dogs will have an ear tattoo, the ear tattoo is currently not allowed to be used in the event of a microchip failure. We don't think that's acceptable. It makes no sense. If the dog has tattoo identification, that should be as good as microchip identification. And all we're asking for at this point is that the tattoo can be taken into consideration in the event of a microchip failure. We are going to be campaigning to do that, and we would like to think that perhaps in the future that situation will change. DEFRA are very supportive of tattooing, and they're very aware that there are dogs coming through on the pet passport that are tattooed. We can see absolutely no reason why in the future the tattoo shouldn't be taken into consideration.